The oldest memories of our species do not begin with kings, kingdoms, or battles. They begin with the sky. Long before the first city rose from clay, long before the first priest scratched symbols into stone, human beings scattered across deserts, forests, and mountains painted the same impossible shapes. They carved the same towering silhouettes, they whispered the same story, that something once descended from above and walked among them. It is a pattern so old, so widespread, and so strangely consistent, that the deeper we look, the harder it becomes to call it coincidence. Across the mesas of North America, the Hopis still pass down the tale of the ant people beings who appeared when the world was ending. They were not insects, despite the name given to them thousands of years later. They were tall, thin, dark beings with elongated heads and large, unblinking eyes. When fire swept across the earth in an age long forgotten, these beings led the Hopi ancestors down into deep caverns beneath the desert, sheltering them until the world cooled and life could return. The Hopi do not speak of this as myth. They speak of it as memory, a story older than cities, older than tribes, older even than language itself. Half a world away, on the sunburned stone of the Sahara, another memory waits. In Tassili Niger, where more than 15,000 ancient paintings stain the walls of sandstone canyons, the same strange forms appear again. Towering, round-headed figures, with domed helmets and featureless faces, stretch their arms over herds of hunters and animals. Their proportions are wrong to large, too smooth, too otherworldly. Archaeologists call them shamanic visions or ritual symbolism. But even among the most symbolic art of prehistory, they stand out. The shapes are precise, repeated, deliberate, as if early humans were not imagining something but documenting something, locking an encounter into stone before memory could distort it. And even farther east, the sands of Mesopotamia hide another echo of the same pattern. This time it is not painted on rock, but woven into the very birth of civilization. The Sumerians, the people who built the first cities, invented writing, and charted the stars, said openly that none of it was their own invention. Their tablets recorded luminous beings descending from the heavens in storms and fire, landing in places marked by thunder and smoke. These beings were the Anunnaki, those who came from heaven to earth. They taught writing, mathematics, agriculture, astronomy, the foundations of civilization itself. To the Sumerians, these were not metaphors. These were teachers. Travel west to Egypt, and the same voice speaks again in a different tongue. The ancient Egyptians remembered a time called Tepi, the first time when gods of light descended from the sky, emerging from the primeval waters to bring order to chaos. Thoth gave writing. Osiris and Isis brought agriculture, law, and healing. Their temples, pyramids, and calendars were aligned not with the earth, but with the stars, as if in gratitude to the place from which their teachers had come. Then we crossed the ocean into the high, dry deserts of Peru. Lines carved into the earth stretch 4 miles, straight lines. Animal forms, geometric shapes. To someone standing on the ground, they appear meaningless, but from the sky, they reveal their shapes with perfect clarity. The Nazca had no aircraft, no platforms high enough to see these designs. So why make art only the sky could see? And why do these enormous figures, monkeys, hummingbirds, spiders, trace pathways that look eerily like markers or signals? The Dogon of West Africa offer another clue. Long before telescopes existed, they described Sirius as a binary star system, Sirius A, and its dense, invisible companion, Sirius B. Modern astronomy confirmed this only in the 19th century, yet the Dogon knew its orbital period, its density, even its color. When asked how their ancestors could have known, they gave the same answer that appears in myths across the world. They were taught by visitors from the sky, and through it all, the same images return like a shadow following the sun. Winged gods stepping down from heaven in Mesopotamia, feathered serpents descending from clouds in Mesoamerica, dragons of light spiraling down from the firmament in ancient China, carrying knowledge of farming, medicine, and astronomy. The same archetype repeats with unnerving clarity. Beings arriving from above, teaching, guiding, warning, then leaving. These cultures did not trade stories. They did not share languages, religions, or worldviews. They were separated by oceans, mountains, and tens of thousands of years. Yet somehow, the fingerprints match. The Hopi ant people and the Sahara's great masked figures share the same insect-like heads. The Sumerian gods and the Egyptian shining ones descend in storms, light, and sound. The Dogon and the ancient Chinese both look to Sirius and Orion as sacred points of origin. The Nazca lines visible only from the air echo the sky arrival stories found everywhere from Australia to Peru. Mainstream archaeology offers explanations, symbolism, convergence, imagination. Maybe these cultures all looked to the heavens because the sky is universally mysterious. Maybe fear and awe shaped their myths. Maybe the patterns are coincidence. But each time this explanation is offered, the same doubt lingers. If these were only dreams, why are the details so specific? Why the helmets? Why the glowing bodies? Why the repeated motif of beings who come down, teach, and vanish? It raises a question that hangs in the air like dust, catching the last light of dusk. What if the first humans were trying to tell us something? What if all these cultures are known to each other, separated by oceans and epics were, not inventing stories, but preserving memories? Memories of visitors whose presence was so overwhelming, so transformative, that even after 10,000 years, the echo of their arrival still travels through our myths, our art, and our oldest fears. Something once connected humanity across continents and millennia, and whatever it was, every culture points in the same direction. If we want to understand how far back this pattern stretches, this quiet insistence that something once came down from the sky, then we must step into the deepest darkness humanity ever knew. Before pyramids, before ziggurats, before tablets or temples or kings, there were caves. And on the walls of those caves, hidden for millennia under dust and silence, the first witnesses left their testimony. They did not write words. They wrote images, shapes, silhouettes, traces of encounters that refused to fade from memory. The story begins in the ancient past, in a Sahara that did not yet resemble the dead, shimmering emptiness we know today. 10,000 years ago, this place was green alive, with rivers and grasslands, herds of animals, and tribes of hunter-gatherers who moved with the seasons. In the sandstone labyrinth of Tassili Najir, they painted the world they saw. They painted women, cattle, antelopes, children. They painted hunts, dances, rituals, and migrations. And then, almost abruptly, they painted something else. Among the animals and hunters appear towering figures with round, bulbous heads, smooth, featureless, and unmistakably helmet-like. Some have thick outlines as if encased in suits. Others are connected by thin lines running behind them, like trailing cables or tubes. A few hover above the ground, arms outstretched, floating impossibly over the scenes of daily life. And one stands larger than all the rest, a massive imposing silhouette, early explorers nicknamed the Great Martian God. Mainstream archaeology labels these beings as shamanic visions. They argue that ancient people, lost in trance or ritual, imagined themselves transforming into spirits. But the precision of these shapes, the repeated proportions, the rounded helmets, the static posture tells a different story. Shamans may envision animals with exaggerated forms, spirals, or symbolic distortions, but they do not consistently imagine creatures who look engineered. If the hunters of Tassili wanted to represent gods, why depict them with such mechanical symmetry? If they sought to paint their dreams, why do the dreams align so closely with imagery we today associate with technology? From the Sahara, we travel east, across oceans and time, into the humid cliffs of northern Australia. Here, in the rock shelters of the Kimberley region, another ancient memory waits. Painted with white pigment, their faces smooth and featureless, the Wandjina stare down like silent sentinels. Their eyes are large and black, their heads encircled by halos that radiate outward like a soft glow. Their bodies are minimal, draped in what look like cloaks or suits. To the Aboriginal people who still live here, the Wandjina are not extinct myths, they are ancestors. Beings who came from the clouds in the dream time, who shaped rivers, carved valleys, brought rain and law, and taught humanity how to live. When their work was done, they ascended back into the sky. Every year, during the rainy season, local clans repaint these figures to renew their presence. They are not allowed to fade, they are part of a relationship, one that never ended. The resemblance to the Tassili figures is striking. The same round heads, the same smooth mask-like faces, the same luminous outlines. These two cultures, separated by continents and not even aware of each other's existence, painted beings who differ from humans in the exact same ways, as if they both saw something neither could explain in the language of their time. When we look north to the Italian Alps, another thread joins the pattern. In Val Camonica, 8,000 years old, carvings etched into rock show human-like figures wearing rounded helmets with radiating lines, almost like beams of light. Some figures hold tools or perhaps weapons that emit straight, defined rays. Others stand beside stars, etched with geometric precision. Scholars say these are depictions of gods or symbols of fertility. But nothing in prehistoric Europe suggests the people here imagined gods with helmets and energy-beaming tools. Then, to the west, across the ocean, among the mesas and canyons of North America, the Hopi recount their most sacred story, the ant people who saved humanity from destruction. They describe elongated heads and large eyes, bodies tall and slender, strength enough to dig through earth and stone, a memory of being led deep underground while the world above was consumed by fire or flood. Not insects, not metaphors. Beings who came from the stars, guided the Hopi, then returned to the sky. Travel south into the dense rainforests of Brazil, and the same images appear again. In the ancient caves of Serra da Capivara, small humans stand beside towering forms with oversized heads and long arms. The proportions are precise. Humans are tiny beside these giants. Some seem to raise their hands in reverence. Others appear to receive instruction. Surrounding these figures are geometric shapes, vertical lines descending from above like beams or ladders. The tribes who still live nearby say these images represent the Rajas, the sky beings who taught their ancestors farming and the secrets of the seasons before leaving again. Cross the ocean once more, into the highlands of southern Africa, in the Drakensberg Range, the Sand Bushmen, the oldest surviving culture, on Earth painted tall, narrow figures with glowing outlines that shimmer like heat or energy. The mainstream interpretation is that these are visions from trance dances, yet the San oral history speaks clearly. Visitors came down from the sky in times of drought, offering guidance before disappearing into the stars. It is the same story, again and again. Beings descending, teaching, departing. Across these vast distances, Algeria, Australia, Italy, Hopi lands, Brazil, South Africa, there is no shared language, no shared religion, no shared culture. And yet, somehow, the artistic vocabulary is the same. A round head, a luminous outline, a non-human proportion, a descent from the sky, a message or teaching, an eventual departure. If all of this were symbolic, why do the symbols match so perfectly across continents? Why do the distortions follow identical rules? Why does humanity's earliest art repeatedly emphasize the same anatomical features, the same posture, the same otherworldly presence? Mainstream scholars offer explanations, vision quests, ritual masks, symbolic transformation, but the consistency of these figures, their unnatural precision, and their links to legends of descent and instruction leave us with a quieter, more unsettling possibility. Perhaps the earliest artists did not paint spirits or dreams. Perhaps they painted witnesses. Perhaps they carved into stone the memories they feared would one day be forgotten. If so, then the caves of Tassili, the cliffs of Kimberley, the dark rock shelters of Valcamonica, the Hopi stories, the Brazilian murals, and the sand paintings are more than scattered fragments of imagination. They are pieces of the oldest message humanity ever sent to its future. A message written not in words, but in images. A message that whispers, across 10,000 years, we were not alone. If the earliest artists were recording what they saw, then the next question unfolds naturally. What happened after those encounters? If something descended from the sky and stood before humanity in its fragile beginnings, what came next? For thousands of years, the answer echoes through creation myths, sacred hymns, temple inscriptions, and oral traditions. Everywhere we look, the pattern remains the same. After the descent came instruction, after fear came guidance, and after the first contact came civilization. We begin in the cradle of humanity's written memory, Mesopotamia. The Sumerians were not merely the first to write, they were the first to explain how knowledge arrived. Their tablets, baked hard by time, described luminous beings descending from the heavens in storms of fire and wind. These beings, the Anunnaki, did not appear as distant spirits, but as physical presences, towering, radiant, and entirely godlike to the shepherds and farmers who watched them land. According to the Sumerians, the Anunnaki did not simply inspire them, they taught them. They taught irrigation in a land where rivers flooded unpredictably. They taught agriculture with a precision that allowed fields to yield consistent harvests. They taught mathematics, basic 60 calculations, geometric understandings, and astronomical cycles that rivaled later Greek knowledge. They even taught how to measure fields and store grain, a level of administrative sophistication that seemed to spring out of nowhere. Mainstream historians call this mythology, but the Sumerians insisted these gods walked among them, spoke to them, governed them, and then returned to the sky when their tasks were complete. If this is only allegory, why does it describe practical knowledge? Why does it align so precisely with real, measurable advancements? We shift west along the fertile riverbanks of the Nile. Ancient Egypt's story begins not with the rise of a king, but with an age called Zep-Tepetha first time. In this era, according to their temple walls and sacred texts, sky beings of brilliant light descended into the primeval waters and brought order to chaos. Thoth emerged with the gift of writing. Osiris and Isis brought laws, agriculture, healing, and moral guidance. Even the first architect, Imhotep, designer of the step pyramid of Saqqara, was said to have been instructed by gods who came from the heavens. Egyptian civilization did not grow gradually, like a seed sprouting from barren ground. It appeared fully formed. Its first monuments were already aligned to Orion. Its first temples incorporated astronomical knowledge that should have taken generations to refine. If humans invented these skills alone, why is the learning curve missing? Why does the sophistication arrive instantly, without trial and error? Travel west across the ocean into a world of jungles, mountains, and stone cities. In Central America, the Maya and Aztec civilizations recite a story so similar it feels like a translation of the same cosmic memory. After a great flood destroyed the previous age of humanity, a radiant being emerged, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. But behind that poetic name lies a description that recurs with strange consistency. He appeared as a pale, bearded man who arrived from the sea on a shining serpent that moved without oars or sails. He brought astronomy, architecture, mathematics, laws, morality. He taught how to build cities, how to measure time, how to understand the heavens. And when his work was done, he promised to return. His temples were built with such astronomical precision that twice a year, during the equinox, the shadow of a serpent slides down the staircase of Chichen Itza, as if the god himself were descending again. In the Andes, high above the clouds, another figure emerges across the ages. Vira, described as a tall, bearded teacher god who rose from the waters of Lake Titicaca after a period of chaos and darkness. He rebuilt the world teaching language, engineering, agriculture, and governance. Statues show him holding objects that resemble measuring rods or tools. And like Quetzalcoatl, he left the same way he arrived, walking toward the sea, vanishing across the horizon, promising to return if humanity ever faced destruction again. Local legends say that under his guidance, ancient builders constructed sites like Tiwanaku and Puma Punku, places whose impossible stonework still baffles modern engineers. Blocks of dense andesite carved with near-perfect angles, drilled holes, interlocking shapes, technology that appears almost industrial in a world that supposedly lacked metal tools. Then we move east, into the vast and ancient lands of India. The Vedas and the Mahabharata, their oldest sacred texts, recount a world in which sky beings descended in flying chariots, Vimanas. These were not poetic metaphors. The texts describe propulsion, sound, light, and weapons that burn hotter than the sun. They speak of craft that rise vertically, move in all directions, and travel between worlds. These writings, thousands of years old, appear to describe machinery rather than myth. And shortly after these stories were written, India's earliest civilizations developed sudden advancements in astronomy, geometry, metallurgy, and urban planning. China holds another thread. The Yellow Emperor, revered as the father of Chinese civilization, is said to have descended from the sky on a dragon of light, a glowing vessel that shone like the sun. He introduced the compass, medicine, astronomy, metallurgy, irrigation, a suite of technologies that arrived as if delivered in a single generation. Across China, the earliest dynasties referred to their rulers as the sons of heaven, suggesting a lineage traced not to the earth, but to the stars. When we step back, a pattern forms so clearly that it becomes difficult to ignore. It is the same everywhere. A disaster, a descent, instruction, departure, and then the hunter-gatherer becomes a farmer. The wanderer becomes a city builder. The storyteller becomes a mathematician. Astronomy appears with stunning accuracy. Architecture evolves from simple huts to megalithic monuments. Writing emerges, laws codify society. And always, the knowledge arrives too quickly, too completely, to align with human and error. Mainstream explanations attempt to fill the gaps. Social evolution, environmental pressures, population growth. But those theories cannot explain why so many cultures insist the same thing. We did not do this alone. They say the gods came down. They say they were taught. They say the sky opened. They say a shining figure stepped out. They say knowledge was given, not discovered. Across continents, separated by oceans, isolated by time, the stories converge. Not in metaphor, not in theology, in chronology. Civilizations rise suddenly after the appearance of luminous visitors who teach agriculture, writing, mathematics, astronomy, and law. The timeline repeats so consistently that it acts almost like a footprint, one pressed not into sand, but into the unfolding of human history. If these stories are only myths, then the coincidences are extraordinary. If they are memory, then humanity's past is older, deeper, and stranger than we ever imagined. And the first teachers may not have been human at all. If the earliest myths describe visitors who descended from the sky, and the earliest civilizations credit their sudden knowledge to luminous teachers, then the next layer of the story hides in a quieter place inside stone. Not in grand monuments or sweeping legends, but in carvings, reliefs, figurines, and symbols that have survived long after their creators disappeared. These pieces are small, often forgotten, tucked into temple corners, or buried beneath layers of sand. Yet when placed side by side, they whispered the same question. Why do so many ancient images look like machines? We begin in Egypt, where the air is heavy with the scent of stone and desert wind. In the Temple of Abydos, carved into a lintel high above a columned hall, lies one of the most debated reliefs in the ancient world. Overlapping layers of hieroglyphs, weathered, eroded, and complicated by centuries of plaster-formed shapes that modern eyes cannot easily dismiss. One resembles a helicopter, complete with a cockpit and rotor. Another resembles a craft with wings tapering backward. A third looks almost like a submarine. Scholars insist these are coincidences, palimpsests formed when a later pharaoh carved over earlier inscriptions, and perhaps that is true. But the uncanny precision of the shapes, the mechanical silhouettes rising out of ancient stone, raise a question that refuses to disappear. Why do these accidents look so modern? Why these shapes, and not others? A few miles away, in the Temple of Dendera, another puzzle rests on the ceiling of a chamber that has survived intact for 2,000 years. Here, the famous zodiac relief depicts constellations and planetary positions with a level of astronomical type and of understanding far beyond what mainstream history credits to ancient Egypt. The layout is not symbolic, it is functional. The precision suggests, not myth but observation. It is as though someone, long before telescopes, saw the heavens with clarity and left a map for future generations. If the gods of Tepi were real teachers, then perhaps this ceiling is not a reflection of their worship, but of their instruction. Cross the ocean deep into the jungles of southern Mexico, where vines curl around stones, and the past sleeps beneath roots and shadows. In the ruined city of Palenque, archaeologists unearthed the sarcophagus lid of King Pakalon, enormous carved slab that has become one of the most iconic images in ancient mystery lore. The carving shows Pakal seated in a strange posture, leaning forward, gripping what look like handles. His foot rests on a pedal. Beneath him, flames or exhaust burst downward. Around him, tubes and mechanisms curve in precise lines. Mainstream scholars insist this is a stylized depiction of the king descending into the underworld, framed in the imagery of Maya mythology. But the mechanical quality of the carving is difficult to ignore. If an artist had seen a pilot inside a cockpit and tried to describe it using the only symbols and tools available to them, the image might look very much like this an attempt to translate technology into myth. Travel north into the high plateau of central Mexico, where the city of Teotihuacan rises in geometric symmetry. The Pyramid of the Sun towers over a vast grid, its base aligned with celestial bodies. From above, the city forms a layout that mirrors the inner planets of our solar system, complete with orbital paths. Beneath its pyramids, excavations reveal something stranger, layers of mica mineral that reflects radiation and heat embedded, for no ceremonial reason, modern archaeologists can determine. And in hidden chambers, pools of liquid mercury shimmer in the dark. Mercury in ancient times was associated with immortality, the divine, and the reflective path between earth and the heavens. But here, it appears not as a metaphor, but as a deliberate architectural element, placed with purpose. What purpose could that be? Mainstream explanations are scarce: ritual, symbolism, offerings, but none fully account for the engineering choices, the precision, the materials, the cosmic alignment that turns the entire city into a map for watchers above. From Mexico, we journey across the ocean to the cliffs and plains of West Africa, where the Dogon people preserve one of the most inexplicable traditions on Earth. Their oral history states that visitors from the star Sirius, beings called the Namo, descended in a spinning craft surrounded by fire and noise. They taught astronomical knowledge, agricultural cycles, and the cosmic order, and then they left. For centuries, outsiders dismissed this as myth, until modern astronomy confirmed that Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, is indeed a binary system, Sirius A, and a dense, almost invisible companion called Sirius B. The Dogon not only knew Sirius B existed long before telescopes, they knew its orbital period, its density, and its location relative to its companion. Scholars argue these ideas could have been borrowed from outside influences in the 19th or 20th century, but Dogon elders insist the knowledge is far older, passed down long before colonial contact, guarded by select priestly lineages. If the Dogon were guessing, why did their guess match modern astrophysics? Travel north into the cold stone fjords and cliffs of Scandinavia. Bronze Age rock carvings depict circular discs hovering above human figures, rays projecting downward like beams of light. In some carvings, figures stand inside the discs, surrounded by lines that seem to represent motion or energy. Archaeologists interpret these images as sun symbols or ritual boats of the heavens. But the repeated inclusion of figures within the discs, always with the same positioning, adds a note of disquiet. If these carvings were abstract symbolism, why do they depict enclosed craft instead of open vessels? Why the beams? Why the symmetry? Finally, we journey east to Japan, where small clay figurines, known as doger, sit in museum cases like silent enigmas. Created more than 2,000 years ago, they are unlike any other artifact in Japanese prehistory. Their heads are large and rounded, their eyes bulge forward behind goggle-like lenses. Their bodies are encased in thick, articulated suits with seams, ridges, and what appear to be joints or connectors. Some have tubes curling around the neck or chest. Archaeologists call them fertility idols, but nothing about their design suggests fertility. Everything about them suggests protection armor, insulation, possibly even pressure suits. If an ancient artist wanted to depict a visitor whose body was encased in a technological suit, the result might look uncannily like a dog, and so we arrive at a strange crossroads. When viewed in isolation, each artifact can be explained away as symbolism, misinterpretation, coincidence, or imaginative mythology. But when seen together, Abydos, Dendera, Pakal, Teot, Wakan, the Dogon, Nordic discs, Doger figurines, patterned forms, a global mosaic, a shared memory of beings who did not appear as spirits, but as physical presences, encased in armor, surrounded by light, descending from above. If these are only representations of gods, why do they look so distinctly non-human? Why are they shaped like people inside suits? Why the beams, the helmets, the controls, the goggle eyes, the symmetry? Perhaps the ancients were not trying to impress us with metaphor. Perhaps they were trying to warn us with memory. If so, then the stone itself is speaking, and we are only now learning how to listen. If the earliest carvings hint at technology, and the earliest myths speak of teachers descending from the sky, then the next step in the story lies in a place more ancient than any city, temple, or kingdom ever built. A place older than the pyramids, older than the Sumerian ziggurats, older even than the earliest traces of agriculture. A place that should not exist and yet it does, buried beneath the rolling hills of southeastern Turkey. Gobekli. From a distance, it looks like nothing more than a scatter of low mounds and dusty ridges. But as archaeologists peeled back the layers of soil, a truth emerged that rewrote the timeline of human history. Beneath the earth lay rings of megalithic pillars arranged in vast circular enclosures, each stone carved with animals, lions, foxes, vultures, snakes, and geometric symbols that echo across the entire site. Some pillars stand over 16 feet tall and weigh more than 20 tons. Their surfaces are smooth, their reliefs precise, their arrangement deliberate, and they are 11,000 years old. To grasp the significance of that number is to feel the ground shift beneath your feet. Gobekli Tepe was built in a time when humans were supposed to be nomad scattered hunter-gatherers with no agriculture, no cities, no stable settlements. They should not have had the manpower, the planning, the logistics, or the engineering required to shape and transport stones of such scale, yet someone did. Someone gathered hundreds of people together, organized labor, designed circular temples, carved animals into stone, and aligned the enclosures with specific points in the sky. Mainstream archaeology, confronted with this impossibility, offers a cautious explanation. Perhaps religion came before agriculture. Perhaps the desire to build temples made people settle down. Perhaps Gobekli Tepe represents an early spiritual center built by highly motivated hunter-gatherers. But this explanation struggles to address the deeper contradictions. Why do the pillars appear fully formed, without earlier, simpler prototypes? Why does the engineering sophistication jump from nothing to perfection? Why do the carvings resemble later symbolism found in Sumer and Egypt culture separated from Gobekli Tepe by 6,000 years? And perhaps most unsettling of all, why was the site deliberately buried? Every enclosure at Gobekli Tepe was filled in by human hands. Millions of pounds of soil, rocks, and refuse were carefully piled into the structures, sealing them like time capsules. This was not destruction, it was preservation. Someone wanted these rings hidden but not erased, as if they were sealing a message for a future world, or protecting a sacred memory from something that was coming. What could compel a culture to bury its greatest achievement? To find an answer, we must look to the sky. Many of the pillars at Gobekli Tepe appear aligned to celestial points, the constellation Orion, the star Sirius, and key positions of the night sky as it appeared more than 10,000 years ago. These are not random alignments. They are deliberate, precise, intentional. They suggest that whoever built these enclosures understood the movements of the heavens with a sophistication far beyond what their era should have allowed. If the stories of sky beings who taught astronomy and agriculture have any foundation in real encounters, then Gobekli Tepe may represent the earliest physical echo of that contact or sanctuary built in the shadow of instruction. Nearby myths paint a strangely familiar picture. In the ancient Near East, long before written records, oral traditions spoke of a time after a great flood when luminous beings descended from the stars to help humanity rebuild. Some versions call them gods, other versions call them watchers. Some describe them as giants, others as radiant teachers. But the sequence remains the same: catastrophe, descent, guidance, departure. Gobekli Tepe sits precisely on the timeline when many cultures place this rebirth of civilization. If this site was built under the guidance of visitors, be they divine, extraterrestrial, or survivors of a lost civilization, then its sudden appearance makes sense. Its advanced engineering makes sense. Its precise astronomical knowledge makes sense. And its burial becomes something else entirely. Perhaps it was buried to protect sacred knowledge. Perhaps it was sealed because the age of contact had ended. Perhaps the builders knew that a new world was coming, one that needed to find this place much, much later. From Gobekli Tepe, the story unfolds like a thread stretching across the ancient world. A few thousand years later, in the valleys of Mesopotamia, the Sumerians built the first ziggurats, massive stepped towers that rose toward the heavens. Their structure was symbolic, but also functional. Each level represented a layer of the sky. At the top, a shrine waited for the gods. The word ziggurat itself comes from the Akkadian, meaning to rise high. These were literal stairways between earth and the heavens. According to Sumerian texts, the ziggurats were designed as places where the Anunnaki descended. Whether these descents were physical or symbolic, the shape is unmistakable. A human-built mountain, inviting a return from above. When later civilizations adopted the design, Babylon, Assyria, Persia, they inherited the architecture but forgotten the origin. What began as a possible meeting place became a symbol of royal authority and cosmic order. Then there is Teotihuacan, Puma, Punku, Angkor Wat, structures built thousands of miles apart, by cultures with no contact, yet all designed with astronomical precision and megalithic ambition. As if humanity, in the aftermath of Gobekli Tepe, suddenly remembered how to build monuments to the sky. Teotihuacan, aligned with the Pleiades, Puma Punku cut with engineering that modern tools struggle to replicate. Baalbek moved stones heavier than any lifted before the Industrial Age. Angkor Wat mirrored Draco and the Milky Way, and all of them rise from history with no gradual learning curve. Gobekli Tepe is the first shockwave. The rest are echoes. Mainstream explanations emphasize independent cultural development. But how many times can civilizations independently invent the same astronomical alignments, the same megalithic techniques, the same cosmic patterns? How many times can independent invention mirror the same shape, the same purpose? The stones seem to whisper an older truth. Something taught the first humans how to build. Something showed them how to read the sky. Something sparked the first flame of civilization. And Gobekli Tepe may be the place where that knowledge first entered the world, or where it was last seen. It stands not just as a monument, but as a question carved into the earth. Who taught humanity how to build a temple before they even learned how to plant a seed? If Gobekli Tepe was the spark, the first impossible sanctuary built before humanity knew how to be civilized, then what followed was a cascade. Across continents and centuries, something began pushing human beings to build upward. Not outward, not downward, but toward the sky. As if the memory of luminous teachers had lodged itself deep in our collective mind, urging us to recreate a pathway back to the heavens. And in every corner of the ancient world, we find structures that rise not from slow evolution, but from sudden leaps, monuments that appear fully formed, as if modeled on something older, something remembered, something shown. We begin in Sumer, in the Fertile Crescent flanked by the Tigris and Euphrates. The first cities appeared almost overnight. Uruk, Eridu Yor, their temples dominated the skyline, but none more so than the stepped towers called ziggurats. These were not simple shrines. They were engineered mountains-layered platforms rising in geometric precision, each level climbing one step closer to the sky. From their summits, priests studied the movements of the stars, charting cycles that modern astronomers still recognize. The ziggurat was, in many ways, a physical expression of Sumerian theology. To the people who built these towers, the gods did not dwell in ethereal realms, they traveled between heaven and earth. The very design of the ziggurat reflects that belief. A stairway, a platform, a landing place. The top was not a place for humans to climb up, but for gods to come down. Later empires adopted the structure without understanding its origin. Babylon built the ziggurat of Etzit-Mananki, a towering edifice many believe inspired the story of the Tower of Babel. But even they inherited this architecture from a memory more ancient than their own. Travel west into the Mediterranean and cross the sea into Lebanon. Here, in the ancient city of Baalbek, a temple complex stands upon a foundation unlike any other on earth. Beneath Roman columns and carved lintels lie stones, so massive that even modern cranes strain to imagine lifting them. The trilithon, 3 megalithic blocks each weigh more than 800 tons. And nearby sits the infamous stone of the pregnant woman, measuring over 1,000 tons. To call these stones enormous is an understatement. They are the largest stones ever moved by human hands, or so we have been told. No ancient quarry marks remain, showing how they were cut. No ramps, no rolling logs, no bronze tools capable of carving or transporting such monoliths. And yet they rest in perfect alignment. The Romans, brilliant engineers though they were, simply built their temple atop what was already there. They seem to regard these foundations as sacred and touchable. Local legends say the platform was constructed in the first days after the flood by a race of giants under the instruction of sky beings. Whether myth or memory, the enigma remains. How could an unknown civilization lift stones heavier than anything moved until the modern age? From Lebanon, we journey high into the Andestan air, icy winds and stone ruins scattered across the barren plateau. At Puma Punku, a site near the ancient city of Tiwanaku, blocks of andesite lie strewn like the remnants of a dismantled machine. These stones are not rough or primitive. They are cut with angles so precise that engineers measure their edges in millimeters. Some contain drilling holes with perfect cylindrical symmetry. Others fit together like interlocking components of an industrial design rather than a prehistoric temple. Andesite is harder than granite. Bronze chisels, the only tools known to exist in this region at the time, could not have shaped it. Even with modern diamond-tipped equipment, reproducing some of these cuts would be a challenge. Yet someone, thousands of years ago, carved these geometric shapes and assembled them into a structure the world no longer knows how to interpret. Local legends say the gods built Puma Punku in a single night, descending from the sky with knowledge and tools beyond human comprehension. Archaeologists classify this as myth, but the precision of the stonework remains unexplained. Travel north, not west, not east, into the Valley of Mexico, where Teotihuacan rises in silent grandeur. A city that predates the Aztecs, the Maya, and perhaps even known Mesoamerican civilization. No one knows who built it. No one knows why. Yet its design is unmistakably deliberate. The Avenue of the Dead stretches straight for miles, connecting the Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Sun, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. The alignment corresponds not just to the sun, but to the Pleiades star cluster revered by cultures across the ancient world. Beneath its pyramids lie tunnels lined with sheets of mica. Mica is reflective, heat-tolerant, and radiation-resistant. Why embed such a material beneath a pyramid? For ritual? For insulation? For something else entirely? And inside these tunnels, archaeologists discovered pools of liquid mercury, shimmering, dangerous. Mercury was associated with immortality, the underworld, and divine realms. But in Teotihuacan, it appears not as symbolism, but as part of the architecture. If this city was a symbolic gateway to the heavens, why embed materials that look more suited to technology than ritual? Why map the solar system into the very layout of the streets? From Mexico, we cross half the world into the humid jungles of Cambodia. Rising above the forest canopy, Angkor Wat stands as the largest religious monument ever built. But its significance lies not only in its scale, but in its precision. Its central towers mirror the constellation Draco. Its layout corresponds to the Milky Way, as seen above Cambodia 1,000 years ago. Its moats and causeways align to solstices and equinoxes. The temple is a cosmic map carved into stone, a mirror of heaven placed upon the earth. According to ancient Khmeran inscriptions, Angkor Wat was designed after the blueprint of the gods, a phrase easily dismissed as metaphor until one considers the precision required to align not just the temple's orientation, but its proportions, distances, and astronomical correspondences. And then we step back. We look at Sumerian ziggurats, we look at Baalbek's megaliths, we look at Puma Punku's machine-cut blocks, we look at Teotihuacan's cosmic grid. We look at Angkor Wat's star map in stone, separated by oceans, separated by millennia, separated by culture, language, and belief. And yet all point upward. All align to constellations. All use geometry beyond their time. All rise suddenly, without prototypes. All echo a memory humanity did not fully understand. Mainstream scholarship insists these were independent achievements, products of cultural ambition, religious devotion, or astronomical curiosity. But the pattern pulls at the edge of reason. How many times can civilizations independently build monuments aligned to Orion? How many times can societies leap from primitive tools to megalithic mastery without transitional stages? How many times can mortals build stairways to the sky without remembering why? It is as if something once descended, and humanity across every continent spend the next several thousand years trying to build a way back up. The monuments stand as reminders, not just of human ingenuity, but of a shared longing that stretches across the ages. A longing to reconnect with something that once walked among us. Something that left, something we still wait for. If the megaliths are stones raised toward the heavens, and the earliest myths echo voices descending from them, then something deeper begins to emerge, a thread woven through every culture, every continent, every era. It is the same thread that winds through Tasila's helmeted giants, through the Sumerian tablets, through the Maya temples, through the Dogon star lore and the Khmer zodiac carved in stone. A thread that suggests that none of these stories stand alone. They are fragments of a single narrative, one told in different languages, with different symbols, yet always with the same structure. Catastrophe, descent, instruction, departure, civilization rising suddenly in the aftermath. It begins with disaster, floods, fires, droughts, darkness. Every culture describes a moment when the world reset, when a previous age collapsed or burned or sank beneath the waves. The Hopi remember worlds destroyed by fire and floods. The Sumerians describe a great deluge from which only a handful survived. The Maya, the Aztecs, the Hindus all speak of cycles of destruction and renewal. These are not vague metaphors. They are detailed sequences of calamities occurring long before recorded history. The second step is descent, beings who come from the sky during or after the catastrophe. They arrive not as ethereal forces, but as luminous presences, radiant figures, or towering shapes. The Hopi Ant people appear underground to shelter humanity. The Mesopotamian Anunnaki descend in storms of fire and noise. The Egyptian gods of Tepi emerge from celestial waters. Quetzalcoatl arrives on a shining serpent. Viracaka rises from Lake Titicaca. The Vedic gods fly in blazing chariots. The Yellow Emperor descends on a dragon of light. Their forms change across cultures, but their arrival never does. Always after a collapse, always from above, always at the threshold between destruction and rebirth. Then comes instruction. Almost instantly, humanity leaps forward. Hunter-gatherers become farmers. Nomads become city builders. Astronomy, writing, metallurgy, irrigation, mathematics skills that should have taken thousands of years to evolve appear within a handful of generations. It happens in Sumer, in Egypt, in the Indus Valley, in China, in the Andes. Languages crystallize. Calendars synchronize with the heavens. Temples align to solstices, equinoxes, and star clusters. Everywhere the knowledge appears, it appears as a gift. And those who bring this knowledge are described not as abstract symbols, but as teachers, literal beings who instruct humanity in the skills of survival and civilization. The final step is departure. Just as suddenly as they appear, the luminous visitors leave. They return to the sky, to the sea, to the stars. They promise to come again or fade without explanation. But their shockwaves remain in stone and memory. Myth solidifies into religion. Teachers become gods, visitors become legends. And civilization stands as the monument to what was left behind. When viewed individually, each myth seems like a curious, isolated tradition. But when seen together, they form a cycle so consistent that it borders on choreography. Flood gives descent, gives teaching, gives departure, gives rise of civilization, the same sequence mirrored across the planet. Mainstream archaeology sees these as metaphor stories invented to explain the rise of social order. But metaphors do not independently align across oceans. They do not produce identical sequences of events in cultures that never met. They do not overlap in symbols, timing, and function. And the similarities do not end with story. They echo through architecture. When the first sky beings depart, humans begin to build structures that point back toward the heavens. Every major ancient culture constructs temples, towers, or pyramids aligned to stars considered sacred. The Sumerians built ziggurats that reflected the layers of the sky. The Egyptians built pyramids aligned to Orion's belt. The Maya built observatories so precise they track Venus like a clock. Teotihuacan's avenues trace the orbit of the Pleiades. Angkor Wat mirrors the Milky Way. Stonehenge aligns with sun. The Nabta Playa stones in the Sahara mark star risings older than the pyramids themselves. It is as if the moment the sky teachers left, humanity began building monuments to invite them back. This pattern is not subtle. It is carved into the earth, into bedrock, into the bones of cities and myths and megaliths. And it raises a deeper question. Why would humans from every era and region respond to these sky beings in the same way? One possibility is psychological. Carl Jung's idea that human minds produce identical archetypes. But archetypes explain symbols like serpents, mothers, kings not helmets, controls, beams of light, or flying craft. Archetypes do not explain sudden leaps in engineering. They do not explain megaliths requiring mathematics not yet invented. They do not explain Dogon astronomy that matches 20th century science. Another possibility is cultural convergence. Humans everywhere experience the sky, so they create sky gods. But convergence cannot account for sequences, timing, or technical detail. If all cultures independently imagine gods from the sky, why do those gods all behave the same way? Why do they all appear after catastrophe? Why do they all teach agriculture, astronomy, and low-never pottery, or weaving? Why do their teachings mirror real scientific knowledge? The pattern behaves less like shared imagination and more like shared memory. The archaeological record reinforces this. Civilizations do not rise gradually. They spike, they appear suddenly. Sumer emerges with mathematics, law, and astronomy already perfected. Egypt's earliest architecture is its most precise. China's first dynasties arrive with complex calendars and metallurgy. The Indus Valley has grid-planned cities and drainage systems from its inception. Indian cultures leap from stone huts to Puma Punku's machine-cut blocks without transition. If humans invented these skills alone, where are the failed prototypes? Where are the centuries of experimentation? The absence of gradual evolution is itself a pattern, a long, quiet pattern, suggesting that civilizations began not with invention but with instruction. The pattern stretches deeper still when we examine mythology, not as isolated narratives but as encoded memory. Flood myths around the world describe not only water, but the sudden reappearance of the sky teachers who endured the catastrophe. Mesoamerican stories speak of beings who survived a previous world. Indian epics describe ancient wars fought with weapons of sound and fire. Greek myths echo older memories of divine visitors and hybrid offspring. Australian Dreamtime speaks of the Wandjina descending from clouds to carve rivers and laws. All these stories share a structure. They remember something the world once saw, something that came from the sky, something that brought knowledge, something that left behind a blueprint. Perhaps the most haunting part of this pattern is what it implies, not that humans were created by gods, nor that aliens shaped our evolution, nor that forgotten civilizations once ruled the earth, but that the truth is somewhere in the space between, somewhere blurred, somewhere ancient. Somewhere humanity has tried to translate for millennia, because whether the visitors were extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or survivors of a lost age, the result is the same. Humanity remembers them. In our myths, in our monuments, in our alignments to the stars. We remember the pattern even if we have forgotten the story. In the stones, the carvings, the legends, the impossible leaps in knowledge, they all whisper the same question. What, or who, stood at the beginning of our civilization, and why did they leave? If every continent holds a fragment of the same story, and every fragment fits into a pattern too deliberate to call coincidence, then the mind naturally reaches for explanations. Some grounded in psychology, some in anthropology, some in science, some in cosmology. Each theory offers a lens through which to look at the ancient world, yet none of them, on their own, can hold the full weight of the evidence. They answer pieces, not the whole. And the deeper we search, the more each explanation reveals both its strength and its fracture. The first explanation is the one most scholars reach for. Jungian archetypes, the idea that humanity shares a subconscious blueprint of symbols inherited across generations. The hero, the mother, the trickster, the serpent, the god who descends from above. According to this view, sky beings appear everywhere, not because something descended, But because the human psyche universally projects power into the heavens, lightning becomes divine wrath, the sun becomes a god, the unknown becomes a presence. It is a compelling theory, elegant in its simplicity, but it cannot explain the detail. Archetypes are broad strokes. They can shape the idea of a god, but not the specifics of helmets, lenses, pressure suit bodies, or machines that resemble engines. Archetypes cannot produce identical synchronous flood descent, instruction, departure and culture separated by oceans. Archetypes cannot account for Dogon astronomy that matches modern astrophysics. They cannot explain the mathematics of Teotihuacan or the engineering of Puma Punku. Archetypes whisper symbolism. They do not whisper machinery. And so we move to the second explanation: cultural convergence. Humans everywhere experience the same sky, the same storms, the same seasons. Of course they develop sky gods. Of course they imagine divine teachers. Of course they attribute natural forces to supernatural beings. Under this view, mythology evolves in parallel because human experience is universal. But again, the details resist. Convergence might explain why cultures worship the sky, but not why they describe beings arriving in fire and noise. It cannot explain why the beings always teach the same knowledge: mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, law. It cannot explain why these beings always depart, promising to return. Nor can it explain how civilizations that never met align their pyramids to Orion, or why so many carved discs with figures inside, or why every continent depicts elongated-headed beings with large eyes. Convergence explains the urge. It does not explain the blueprint. The third explanation is more daring, and more controversial: the lost civilization hypothesis, championed most famously by Graham Hancock. According to this view, humanity once shared the planet with a highly advanced culture that existed before the end of the last ice age. This civilization possessed astronomy, geometry, engineering, and perhaps even seafaring abilities long before other humans. When global floods struck around 12,000 years ago, events echoed in myths across the world. This civilization collapsed. A few survivors traveled across the planet, teaching scattered human tribes how to rebuild. These survivors became the sky teachers of myth, later worshipped as gods. This theory explains much. It explains the sudden appearance of megalithic architecture. It explains the astronomical precision of Gobekli Tepe. It explains the rapid rise of Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and the Maya. It explains the shared motif of a before time destroyed by catastrophe. It even fits with the archaeological shockwave that Gobekli Tepe represents the world's first temple appearing fully formed before agriculture, but it has fractures. No metal tools from this civilization have been found. No written records survive, at least none we recognize. No city belonging to this culture has emerged intact. And yet, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. If the civilization was coastal, as many suggest, most of its remains would now lie beneath the ocean, buried by rising seas after the Ice Age. The world has explored only a fraction of its seafloor. Still, the theory raises as many questions as it answers. The fourth explanation steps beyond Earth entirely: the extraterrestrial hypothesis. This idea suggests that ancient myths describe real encounters with beings from another star system. The luminous gods, the fiery chariots, the helmets, the suits, the discs descending from the sky, they are not metaphors, but ancient attempts to describe technology. Under this view, the teachers were not divine. They were travelers, explorers, scientists, visitors who intervened during a fragile moment of human evolution, offered knowledge, and left. This theory, too, explains much. It fits the machinery carved at Abydos. It fits the Dogger figurines. It fits the astronomical maps. It fits the sudden leaps in intelligence and architecture. It fits the global obsession with Orion, Sirius, and the Pleiades star systems that appear again and again in ancient lore. But it has its own abyss. No physical evidence of extraterrestrial craft or technology has been found. No unambiguous trace remains. And yet, skeptics cannot dismiss the persistent similarity of the stories. If humans were describing aliens, the descriptions would look exactly as they do: awkward, symbolic, half-remembered, filtered through the vocabulary of prehistory. Still, speculation is not proof. The hypothesis explains the forms, but not the message. And so we reach the fifth and strangest explanation: the interdimensional hypothesis. The idea that the beings described were not from another planet but from another reality, another layer of existence, another frequency, a parallel world. Modern physics does not dismiss such realms. String theory suggests multiple dimensions. Quantum models hint at overlapping realities. Ancient mystics describe veils, thresholds, and realms that touch but do not merge with ours. In myth, these beings appear as luminous shapes, as radiant giants, as entities made of light, or cloud, or mist. Their voices shake the air. Their presence distorts the world. They slip between realms in ways that sound less like spacecraft and more like shifts in perception. To early humans, this would appear divine. To modern physicists, it might appear dimensional. But again, there is no single thread to confirm it. Each explanation holds one piece of the truth. Each breaks under the weight of the whole. Archetypes explain symbols, but not engineering. Convergence explains worship, but not precision. Lost civilizations explain knowledge, but not the beings. Extraterrestrials explain the beings, but not the myth's spiritual layers. Interdimensional theories explain the strangeness, but not the machinery. And so we stand between them, holding fragments of 5 worlds: psychological, anthropological, archaeological, cosmic, and metaphysical. What remains when all 5 are placed together is the one thing every culture agrees on. Humanity remembers its teachers, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but as beings who stood tall, descended from above, brought light after darkness, and left behind a world transformed. Perhaps the truth is not one theory, but the thin, shimmering line where all 5 touched, a line we have been tracing since the first stories were told. A line carved in stone, drawn in the stars, buried in the oldest temples. A line leading back to a question humanity still cannot let go. What walked with us at the dawn of civilization, and why did it leave? If every theory explains a fragment, and every fragment points toward a larger truth, then the real mystery is not who the visitors were but what they left behind. Because across the ancient world, the traces are not subtle. They are monumental, deliberate, unmistakably meant to endure. They rise from deserts and forests, from mountains and jungles, from places where the earth itself seems to guard them. And taken together, they form something that looks less like coincidence, and more like a message carved across the skin of the planet. A message humanity was supposed to remember. Consider the monuments again, not as isolated marvels, but as chapters of a single story. In Turkey, Gobekli Tepe's pillars face Orion and Sirius, as if acknowledging the sky as an origin point. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid mirrors the belt of Orion, pointing toward Osiris, the god who descended to teach civilization. In Mexico, Teotihuacan's layout reflects the inner solar system and the path of the Pleiades. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat stretches across the ground like the Milky Way, reincarnated in stone. In England, Stonehenge tracks the turning of the sun with a precision that rivals modern observation. In Peru, the Nazca lines form shapes visible only from the air patterns so vast and clean that they require a bird's-eye view to understand. Why would humans with no flight technology design artwork you can only comprehend from above? Why align every major ancient monument to the same clusters of stars? Why carve the sky into stone so precisely that it outlives the cultures that made it? It is almost as though the builders expected someone to look down not from a hill, not from a tower, but from the sky itself. Mainstream explanations struggle to integrate all of these into one coherent picture. They can explain solar tracking, they can explain seasonal needs, they can explain ritual alignment, but they cannot explain why cultures separated by oceans chose the same constellations, the same alignments, the same cosmic references, or why the first architecture of many civilizations is their most precise, or why the oldest temples appear fully formed, instead of showing signs of trial and error, or why megaliths that should not exist because the technology to create them did not yet exist, nevertheless stand. And so the question rises, were these monuments expressions of memory? Were they humanity's attempt to recreate a place, an experience, a moment of contact that shaped the beginning of civilization? If so, then the monuments are more than structures, they are markers, signals, traces of a shared past humanity has forgotten but unconsciously preserves. Look deeper, and the pattern becomes even more uncanny. The same constellations recur. Orion, Sirius, the Pleiades, Draco, the same star systems appear not in isolated myths, but in origin stories across the world. The Egyptians revered Orion as the home of Osiris. The Maya aligned their temples to the Pleiades. The Dogon built their entire cosmology around Sirius. The Chinese traced imperial lineage to Draco and the celestial dragon. The Japanese myth of Amaterasu ties the imperial family to distant celestial origins. Even the Inuit of the Arctic tell of beings who came from a specific star cluster. How could cultures separated by thousands of miles choose the same stars? One explanation is shared sky observation, but that does not answer why they highlight these star-star systems that modern astronomers find inherently significant. Orion hosts star-forming regions. The Pleiades are gravitationally bound and historically important for navigation. Sirius is the brightest star in the sky, with a dense, invisible companion requiring advanced astronomy to detect. Draco coils around the north celestial pole, acting as an anchor for the heavens. These stars were not random. They were chosen, remembered, repeated, as if they mattered, as if they were part of the story. But the message is not only celestial, it is also encoded in mythological structure. Every culture's story of the gods follows the same rhythm. They came in a time of chaos. They brought order, knowledge, and law. They taught civilization. They promised to return. In Egypt, Thoth promised to return in a distant age. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl vowed to come back from the sea. In the Andes, Viracocha left across the ocean, saying he would return when needed. In Polynesia, the Shining One sailed into the sky with the expectation of coming again. In ancient China, the Yellow Emperor ascended on a dragon of light, promising future guidance. These are not random motifs. They are mirrored across thousands of years and thousands of miles. If myths were mere imagination, they would diverge. If they were symbolic, they would vary. If they were isolated, they would contradict. But they do neither. They converge, they echo, they reinforce. And that convergence begins to look less like mythology and more like fragmented memory, the pieces of a story told by different witnesses in different ways. Consider the Dogon, again their knowledge of Sirius B, a star invisible without telescopes, recorded long before modern astronomy confirmed it. If this knowledge was inherited from ancient visitors, then myths are not just stories, they are historical accounts filtered through limited vocabulary. Consider the Mahabharata's descriptions of Vimane's flying craft that emit sound, fire, and beams of light. If this was a memory of technology, then myth and machinery begin to blur into one. Consider the Hopi ant people described as tall, dark, with elongated heads and large eyes, rescuing humanity from cataclysm by sheltering them underground. To modern imagination, they resemble not ants, but beings with helmets and lenses protective suits, rather than kaiden. Consider the Japanese Dogon figurines, with armor-like suits and goggle-like eyes. Fertility idols are something remembered. And then consider the carvings at Valkamanika, at Tepi, in the Australian outback figures, with helmets, suits, tubes, and radiant halos. If these are not stylized gods, then what are they? Mythology becomes something else entirely when the stories repeat across cultures. It becomes testimony. Not from one witness, but many. And what about the symbols that appear everywhere? The spiral, the serpent, the winged disc, the radiant halo, the descending ladder of light, the celestial teacher with elongated skull and luminous body. These symbols form a lexicon, a shared vocabulary older than writing itself. They appear in Sumer, in Egypt, in Peru, in Japan, in Scandinavia, in Australia, in Mali. They appear in places that had no contact, no trade, no possible cultural overlap. Unless the overlap was not cultural, unless it was experiential, perhaps these symbols are the closest humans could get to describing something reality, something their language failed to capture, something they saw but could not fully understand. Perhaps the first artists, the first priests, the first storytellers were not imagining at all, they were remembering, and the monuments were their attempt to preserve the memory in a form that would outlast time, empire, and language. The memory of a moment when the sky opened, and someone stepped through. If every ancient carving, myth, monument, and alignment whispers the same origin story, then the final question is not did contact happen, but something far more intimate. Why does humanity still remember? Why, after 10,000 years, do the same forms continue to echo through our dreams, our stories, our symbols, our architecture? Why does the silhouette of the Skytchers linger in our imagination long after their names have faded? Why does every civilization, from the most isolated tribe to the most complex empire, reach upward as, if answering a presence that once reached down? We may never know what Torhu stood at the cradle of civilization, but the record they left behind is not subtle. It is not hidden, it is not even quiet. It is woven into the foundation of our world, waiting for those with the patience to see the pattern. Consider again the earliest art humanity ever made. Not kings, not battles, not animals, but them. Tall figures with rounded heads, suits that look like armor, eyes covered with lenses, tubes, halos, radiant bodies, beings standing beside humans, not towering above them in unreachable divinity, but present physical interactive. This is not how people draw gods. This is how they draw encounters. Consider again the earliest myths, not abstract metaphors, not vague legends, but detailed accounts of beings descending in light, teaching, writing, astronomy, agriculture, justice. Myths are rarely technical, yet they speak of machines, of sound and fire, of battles fought in the sky. They describe not imagination, but observation filtered through the limitations of ancient language. Consider again the earliest monuments, not experiments, not primitive attempts, but perfection. The Great Pyramids, geometry, Puma Punku's precision cuts, Baalbek's impossible stones, Angkor Wat's cosmic blueprint, Teotihuacan's planetary grid. These are not the works of societies slowly discovering architecture. They are the works of societies, remembering something they were shown, and then consider the sky. Always the sky. Orion, Sirius, the Pleiades, Draco. The same constellations appear in every corner of the ancient world, as home, as origin, as destination, as memory. No single explanation fits this mosaic, not psychology, not coincidence, not independent evolution, not lost civilizations, not extraterrestrials, not interdimensional entities. But perhaps, in some way we do not yet understand, the truth lies in the space where all these theories overlap. Perhaps the story humanity remembers is older, stranger, and more layered than any single narrative can capture. And perhaps that is why the pattern refuses to fade, because the story is not finished. For thousands of years, humans have carved their longing into stone. They have built towers that rise toward the stars. They have aligned temples to the heavens. They have mapped constellations onto Earth. They have kept the memory alive not because they understood it, but because something in them felt its importance. We are a species haunted by a beginning we cannot fully recall. A beginning shaped by teachers who came in a time of chaos. A beginning marked by knowledge humanity was not yet ready to invent. And if those teachers ever walked among us, if the first witnesses carved what they saw, then the monuments they left behind are not relics of worship. They are reminders. Reminders of a relationship, of a moment, of a promise. A promise carried quietly through myth after myth. We will return. And perhaps that is why so many ancient cultures built structures meant to be seen from above, not as tombs, not as temples, but as memories, as markers, as invitations. As invitations. An entire planet, carved across millennia, leaving a message for the sky. A message that has waited long enough. As we step back from the ancient world, the edges of the mystery blur, softening like the colors of dusk. The noise of theories fades. The debate quiets. And what remains is something simpler, something human. We look at the carvings on cave walls, the pillars rising out of dust, the stars mirrored in stone, and we feel a pull. Not toward fear or certainty, but toward wonder. Because whether the visitors were gods, ancestors, travelers, or something beyond all definitions, the truth is that ancient people saw something that changed them, something that lifted their eyes from the earth to the sky, something that shaped the stories they whispered to their children and their children's children, something powerful enough to echo through time until it reached us. And maybe that is the real legacy of the first witnesses, not the monuments, not the myths, not the celestial alignments, but the curiosity they planted inside us, the quiet feeling that we are part of a larger story, the sense that humanity's beginning was not a lonely one. When we stand beneath the stars, we look at the same sky they did, the same constellations, the same silent distances, the same endless dark end. Like them, we wonder who might be watching back. Perhaps the sky teachers never truly left. Perhaps they are simply waiting. Or perhaps the memory of them is the invitation, an open door for us to keep searching. Whatever the truth is, it still whispers across the ages. And until the day that whisper becomes an answer, stay curious.